and welcome. I'm James Milan, and I'm here with Evan Falchuk, who is the United Independent Party candidate for governor. Thanks so much for coming in to talk with us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to get right to a review of the format for this conversation, and it is a live-to-tape interview, so that means that there will be no edits once we begin. There was no pre-screening of the questions, and a strict limit of 2 minutes will be enforced for all answers. We're going to begin with a 1-minute opening statement from the candidate. Then we'll follow with a series of questions and then conclude with a 1-minute closing statement. So without further ado, we invite you to give a 1-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you, and thank you. I'm Evan Falchuk. I am running for governor as an independent, as the founder of the United Independent Party. I grew up in Newton, Mass, where I live with my wife, Felicia, and our 3 kids who are 14, 11, and 7. I've been a business person for my career. I was the president of a healthcare company called Best Doctors that we grew from 9 employees to 600 employees. And I'm running for governor because I'm a voter that has become tired of a political establishment that I don't think takes people very seriously. I believe that in many ways, the leading candidates from both parties are 2 sides of the exact same coin. And we need leadership that is going to take on the high cost of living in Massachusetts, to elect new people into our legislature, and to bring about the kind of smart, brave reform that we all know is so needed in our state. So I look forward to the opportunity to talk about all of the issues that are discussed today, and certainly to earning your vote on November 4th.
Thanks so much. So right to the questions now, and we'll begin with what are the biggest issues, as far as you're concerned, facing the Massachusetts economy? What policy priorities would you support to address those issues, and how would you fund them?
Well, the cost of living is the biggest problem we face. It's excessively high, and it's driven by healthcare costs and housing costs. Healthcare is so expensive because for the last 20 years, we've had bipartisan state policy that has said, let's let the hospitals merge into big systems. Partners is the biggest one of all. And when they merge like this, they start to raise their prices. And every time that happens, it makes your healthcare more expensive. It started in the 90s when Governor Weld had Charlie Baker as head of his HHS. They said, let's deregulate the market. And it's continued today, where we have Martha Coakley supporting the takeover of 2 additional hospital systems by partners. So this has to stop, and it stops by changing the economic model of healthcare to incentivize hospitals to keep you healthy rather than treating you when you are sick. This is something that we can do. Other states have been doing it, such as Maryland. We can save just 5% of the wasted expense in hospitals. That's $2 billion a year that goes right back into people's pockets. We can do this. Housing is so expensive because we just don't construct very much housing in Massachusetts. Most of the housing that does get built is either this large lot zoning or things that are 40B type developments. We can change this. We've developed on our website the Thriving Communities Action Plan, my running mate Angus Jennings and I, that lays out a specific detailed plan about how to unlock the economic potential of our cities and towns by supporting education, local aid, and resources so that they can plan for their future. If we can be focusing on smart growth, multifamily homes, walkable communities, mixed-use neighborhoods, we can lower the cost of living so young people can afford to live here, so that older people who might want to downsize from a larger home to something smaller can do it, so businesses can afford to hire employees in the Commonwealth. These are the things that are possible to do. Now, paying for it means reallocating responsibly state money. There is over $1 billion that's being spent now to expand the convention center. That makes no sense. There's almost $1 billion every year in special tax breaks that go out to very large companies that ought not be coming to the taxpayers for money. These things can change, and they should.
Excuse me for cutting you off, but thanks for that.
Absolutely.
Second question is, what roles and responsibilities do federal, state, and local entities have in addressing energy policy? And do you think that there are circumstances in which federal policy would supersede local or state concerns?
Well, legally, federal policy does supersede, and what we're seeing is with the pipeline that's proposed to be built across the northern part of Massachusetts, which I oppose, the federal government is probably going to end up seizing all the land that will be used for this pipeline. The state has a responsibility to make sure that our energy mix is diverse and resilient, that it's distributed in a way that is reliable and distributed, so that we're not in a situation where we're overly reliant on natural gas like we are today. So we need forward-thinking energy policy that focuses on more renewable energy, having a greater mix, more wind, more solar, and there are tax credits that are required for both. We should be building projects like Cape Wind. We have to be more aggressive about use of hydropower, but more greatly, the federal government And the people that we elect there are the ones that put into place policies that say pipelines are a good way to look at our future. It's not. And we need to have forward-thinking policy. That's what we stand for. That's why we need to elect people to our legislature and to our federal government who believe in these things.
Thank you. Next question. The Foundation Budget Review Commission excuse me, will seek to determine which educational programs and services are necessary to achieve the Commonwealth's educational goals. What do you think are the key programs and services necessary to achieve those goals?
Well, for starters, the Foundation Budget Review Commission, it's a good thing that they're doing it now, but the law says they're supposed to be doing this every 2 years, that is updating the budget for education. And it hasn't happened in 10 years. And in fact, since 1993, it's only happened twice. So when we hear people from either party talk about the fact that they think that kids are the core of our future and we need to invest in them, I don't believe them because the money has not been put in that way. So the Chapter 70 formula needs to be updated to reflect the modern realities of school and kids, which means more money, and it means reallocating responsibly money in our budget. I believe that our educational system has become too focused on standardized tests. I believe we should be looking and saying, what should education look like 20 years out? What should kids be graduating from school with? And it should be critical thinking skills, the ability to work together with others, the ability to have what I call grit, the determination to know that you can overcome obstacles, and focusing too much on standardized tests and not on things like the creative arts and other ways in which children learn to open up their minds to different things is what goes wrong. So that has to be a central part of not just putting more money into this, but doing it in a way that is thoughtful and strategic and thinks about what are the skills that each child must have in order to succeed in a modern economy.
Do you support the expansion, speaking of schools, do you support the expansion of charter schools in Massachusetts? And please explain your reasoning one way or the other.
So I do, and the reason is because there is a need. There are many people in school districts that don't have great capacity in the public schools that want to go to an alternative, and so it should be there. But here's the problem. When the child leaves, the funding goes with them. And that means that the public school ends up having less money than it otherwise would. So in a world where our Chapter 70 funding is already too low, and where the formula for what gets allocated back to the public school when a child leaves to the public school, to the charter school, is out of whack with reality, we're causing a problem to the kids in the regular public school system. So we have to fix Chapter 70. We have to. Unfortunately, in the political process we have today, we get very politicized around this issue of charter schools. So it's either I'm for charter schools and against teachers' unions, or I'm for teachers' unions and against charter schools. Life and reality is far more complex than this, and students and parents deserve far more than soundbitey answers to complex issues like this that ought to be some of our top priorities.
Thank you. What, if any, roles do federal and state governments have in addressing the ever-widening income gap in the U.S.? And again, please be as specific as you can.
Well, remember what I said about the cost of living. That really is what's driving so much of this gap. It means that there isn't opportunity available for people. It also is a reflection of what's happening largely in our state and federal government, which is that so much policy is being made in a way that favors the interests of a small group of highly connected people in their favor. And so that means if you are not highly connected, you end up in that lower group of people whose gap in income ends up becoming farther and farther away from what's affordable to live under. So when we talk about the influence of healthcare costs, we have to look at groups like Partners. Charlie Baker, as an example, he just had a fundraiser by Jack Connors, who is the former chairman of Partners, at which hospital executives and others donated over $200,000 for his campaign. What do they want? What are they looking for? Why is it that groups like Partners have had the influence over policymaking when it comes to things that the Attorney General is doing with these issues? These are the drivers of income inequality, wealth inequality, the continuation and perpetuation of poverty, differential access to care, and to opportunity in our society. We need leadership that's willing to say these things straight out and not be worried about political consequences that might come from saying something bad about the wrong people. In this country, we have known for a long time that monopolistic practices hurt consumers, that they cause serious problems. And in this country, we used to have a policy that would stop this kind of thing from happening. It's time to start to elect leaders that want to take on those difficult challenges rather than either kicking the can down the road or enabling them in the way that we've seen too often.
Some critics have labeled Massachusetts Taxachusetts. I'm sure you've heard that charge. Do you believe that the fees and taxes levied on individuals and corporations are appropriate, or do these rates need to be reevaluated and redistributed?
Well, taxes in Massachusetts actually were sort of in the middle among the 50 states, so calling us Taxachusetts might have been true at one point, but it's not anymore. My larger problem with our tax system in Massachusetts is that it's a flat tax, which is caused by a constitutional amendment that we have that dates back to over 100 years ago, that requires at whatever level of income everybody has to pay the same rate. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think we should be repealing that amendment to the Constitution, and I want to appoint a tax modernization commission to figure out and design a tax code that is suited for not just the 21st century, but since our current tax code is rooted in the 19th, what's right for the 22nd century? How can we think in a long-term way about what supports the growth of small businesses? So I think that's probably something that's more progressive in nature. Perhaps it's more tied to consumption rather than income. But either way, we have to have the flexibility to think creatively. This is a state with so many smart people in it, and yet we refuse to change our tax code to reflect modern reality. It's time to do it.
Thanks. What do you think are the biggest immigration issues facing Massachusetts? What would you do about them? And again, the money question, how would you fund them?
Well, I mean, the issues that you hear so many immigration advocates talk about is making sure that new immigrants in our country are able to master English. And we have a law that was passed back in 2002 that requires, and it's a one-size-fits-all mandate, that schools teach English language learners only in English, that you can't have any kind of bilingual education. Well, on the one hand, this is losing out on the opportunity that speaking a second language represents. You know, my father came to this country from Venezuela, and I speak Spanish, and it's hugely valuable to be able to speak Spanish. Now, I didn't face the challenge of going to school and not being able to speak English, but for the kids that do, let's figure out better ways to do this that are much more flexible and appropriate for those children. If there's more money associated with doing that, maybe we shouldn't give out so many big tax breaks. They're spending $40 million, they say, to do a historical renovation of the House and Senate chambers over the next year. Well, that money should be much better spent on making sure that every child has the best opportunity to get ahead. So to me, English and the ability to speak it are the #1 opportunity that we have to help kids that are immigrants into our country to integrate into our society.
Okay, thanks. And please give one example of an issue that you and your opponents agree on, and then 2 examples of issues on which you differ, and why it is that your own solutions would represent the best interests of the Commonwealth.
Well, you know, this has been one of the biggest challenges in this race, is that it's really hard to pin down Charlie Baker and Martha Coakley as to what they actually think about many, many issues. So if we talk about health care and the cost of living, which I think is the central issue that our government must deal with, it is what is hurting businesses, it is what is making it impossible for families to save, it is what is causing state budgeting to be getting away from helping seniors and kids and veterans and anybody else who we say we need to help, but we don't hear a lot of straight talk about these issues. So I've listened to both of them talk on issues of healthcare, for example, and I hear Martha say, listen, we've, in her words, put a net over the bigness of partners, which I don't even know what those words mean, but that's what her position is. My position is partners has to be stopped, and we need to replace the economic model. Charlie says what we need to have is transparency in healthcare pricing. Well, that's already happened. Not only is there a website available for this, but the state government actually collects this data on a regular basis in the Attorney General's office. So these are not actual solutions. And that's fundamentally the biggest difference between me and the other candidates, is I'm willing to lay it out there. You can disagree with what I say, but at least you know what it is. And that's what's missing from our politics. That's what's motivating my campaign. That's why I founded the United Independent Party.
Okay. And last question, believe it or not. What strategies would you use for working with members of opposing parties and for those of opposing views? And what experience have you had in implementing those kinds of strategies?
Well, so much of this, like for someone from the business world, is trying to work together with people and find win-win solutions. But let's be honest about it. If I'm elected as the first non-Democrat or Republican governor since 1858, that's a big deal. That's a bit of a political earthquake. And we'll see what it's like in the legislature to have a governor who's arriving on that wave of support in terms of working on a shared agenda. Either way, I'll be making sure I work with the people in the legislature very constructively and very hard. But here's the important point. If the people in the legislature don't want to work with me, this is what's happened to President Obama in Washington, D.C. In 2016, when the United Independent Party is an official party, and it will be after this election, once you get past 3% of the vote, you're an official party, we will have lots of new independent candidates on the ballot in 2016. And if we can win some significant number of those races, The United Independent Party will not be some new third party, but instead it'll be the second largest party in our legislature. That's how we start to bring about real meaningful change to our politics. If the question is, how do we make sure that bills get to the governor's desk that match the people's needs? The answer is, elect people who will put them there. That's what this is about.
Great. That actually closes out this series of questions, and you are now invited to give a 1-minute closing statement.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to listen to this. I'm Evan Falchuk. I believe we can be inspired by our politics if we are able to think about and act on what we are capable of doing, not just what is good enough. I believe we need to attack the cost of living and make it lower. And more than anything, I know we need a new framework to elect new independent candidates into our legislature and into our government. When we founded the United Independent Party, the idea was to not just win an election, but to do something much greater, which is to fundamentally transform the map of politics in Massachusetts. People will tell you all the time that a vote for me is a vote for one candidate or another, and it's not true. A vote for me is a vote for a much larger vision, for a different future than the one we have today. I humbly ask for your vote on November 4th, not because I own it, like we often hear from candidates, but because I earned it. Thank you.
And we want to thank Mr. Falchuk for sitting down with us today. Make sure your own voice is heard by voting on November 4th. For Arlington Public News, I'm James Milan, and thanks for joining us today.